Hello, and thank you for joining Real Estate in Colors webinar addressing home theft and deed forging in urban communities. Our guest is Valerie Montoute, and if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Valerie, thank you so much for joining us,
You're
and I
welcome.
am going to give you the floor for you to share your story with us. And I know you wanted to know where you should start.
Mhm.
And let's start with the fact that this is a property that was left to you by your
Note
father,
that when we are anticipating,
that this was a property left to you by your father, and your experience for the past 13 years.
oh, okay. So I guess I'll start from the very, very beginning.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, my father passed away in 1996, and he had a will. In the will, he divvied up his property amongst me, my mother, and my two siblings. During that time, my name and my sister's name was on the property that I currently own, and I bought her out during that time. Um, it started like in 19 he passed away in 1996. So that was when I had my first my very first mortgage, and I was able to get the mortgage through Fleet Bank, which is no longer around. I think they've changed their name to something else. But if you fast forward during that time, I was married and I had a daughter, and I was about to go through a divorce process with my ex-husband at the time. And that's when a lot of the problems began. Um, During that time, they had a big major, let's say, I would say it was about going on the year of 2010, going on 2011. There were a lot of mortgage companies that were offering so many people these ways to refinance. And, that's when, to me, a lot of people encountered, or that's when all the problems started to happen, because there was a lot of balloon payments that were added. Most of the time, most people did not understand them. And it was slightly confusing, because what the banks would do at that time is they would offer someone an opportunity to refinance their mortgage. Let's say the first 2 to 5 years, it would be this extremely low rate. And then when it would get to the fourth or fifth year, when it would balloon to an astronomical amount, meaning that the person would have to come up with that front money. So during that 2 to 4 years where they may have had little to no interest, 2%, 3% or something like that, when the time was to refinance and go into another mortgage, it was pushed because you were hit with a balloon payment, and the balloon payment would wind up being half of the mortgage. So you saw a lot of people going in and out of that. And then sometimes it would be too late. So during my time, what happened was I was with a bank. It went from one bank, but then it went to a servicing company. A lot of times, these banks have servicing companies that get involved. And once a company gets involved, then that's where a lot of discrepancies were coming in. So I had a company that was called Lit and Loan. And Lit and Loan at that time had like issues with their accounting system. They didn't show that I had insurance. They didn't show that they said I didn't have different types of insurance. And from what I understand, that was supposed to be one flat figure under, and also an escrow. So they kept adding and adding things on. Then all of a sudden there was like this big crash, and then there was all these things that were happening, especially I'm only going to talk about the area that I know, which is in Brooklyn. Brooklyn became like this feeding frenzy for a lot of banks, and a lot of banks that came under different names. So some of them would have faltered and they would come under something, another name, or they would, these servicing companies would somehow connect with a bank and take the loan over. So during that time, there was also a attorney. Um, he was working for the banks and he did some unscrupulous things. And it turned out that a lot of people lost their homes during that time. And my actual loan was somehow sent through him from Litton to the new servicing company at that time, which is Aquin. Aquin was supposed to have gone out of business, but they seem to be floating around somewhere, and now they have a new name. So during that process, there was this whole back and forth where they said that I was placed in foreclosure. And when, one of the things when you go into foreclosure, what they do is they take you and they say, okay, we're not going to take away your house because New York State is a mortgage state, which means that they can't just throw you out, right? Just like with a renter, you can't just throw you out. There has to be a process and there has to be a way to assist the person so that they can keep the home. So what they did was we went to like pre-foreclosure court. And that's a time where you get to negotiate with the bank and settle whatever matters because a lot of times it's minor matters, right? So like I said, remember they would have someone in one of these loans where the first couple of years is a very low rate and then it balloons into something else. So then that's when the bank would help you. And even before that, the bank is supposed to technically help you so that you can get back on track, and it would be an affordable process. So when we went to court, it was one set amount, meaning the bank said that, hey, you owe us, let's say the amount is $400,000. By the time we got to the second day of this like negotiation, it went from $400,000 to almost $700,000. So during that time, and which even to this day, the only thing that I ask of all of the banks that have been in and out is what is the actual balance that I owe and how did you get to that number? Also, during that process, a lot of times banks, because they have all these loans, and it was transferring from Litton to Aquin at that time, they lost or some paperwork got misplaced or whatever the story is. They were saying that I defaulted on my payment, which is not true. It is not true at all. They, in turn, what they did was they sent me it back. So we've been battling ever since. So we've been battling basically, it started in about 2011 to present day. And I've been asking the same question and I haven't received that. But also during that process, I was very meticulous and kept all my paperwork. And I still have them both electronically, I have them on electronic as well as physical. And I also have to keep asking them to prove their numbers, right? So, because the biggest question is how did I get a $200,000 difference? And that to the day seems to be what is in discrepancy. And also, I kept all of the correspondence. And if you see a variety of the correspondence throughout the years, and also when we've gone in and out of court, I've gone in and out of court, and I've always had my documentation, and I've always had all my paperwork. And like a lot of people, I do not have the money for a high-powered attorney. So a lot of times, what they would do is, in my case, I went to one of the free legal services. I went to one in Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. I think it's something B Corporation, and then I went to legal, I believe it's Legal Aid. And I went to both of those services looking for assistance. A lot of times when you go to these free services, the lawyers are not equipped to handle any case that's out of quote unquote the norm, meaning my case was not a typical case, meaning it wasn't that I defaulted, it wasn't that I did anything major or anything. I had all my paperwork, I proved my point, and I would ask questions because when they would talk about reinstatement, because they sent me a variety of reinstatement letters, and each one of the reinstatement letters within one particular year had different prices, totally different prices. Some though one of the letters was as low as 25,000 and went as high as 75,000. There's no way you could do that within 1 month span. There's there's no way unless it's the kind of interest. Those kind of letters are still supposed to be done sporadically. So meaning if in credit and collection process, you have to have a certain amount of time frame in between. It can't be like 1 month and then 3 months and then back to 2 months and then 1 month again. It's supposed to be either every quarter they send that out and they show why it's this amount or something else. In those letters, you can see that it was a discrepancy. But as I also said, there was a lawyer that was involved, Mr. Baum, I believe his name was, and he was arrested, but I think he still is servicing clients in Long Island because that's where he was from. He just like some other lawyers, but mainly him when he was indicted and everything. He got rid of all of the paperwork for many people who held mortgages that were in foreclosure, which was one of mine. And he took the paperwork and he dumped it in a dumpster in Long Island, right? In a parking lot, because I received a letter from the Department of Finance that told me that my mortgage documents were found in a parking lot in Long Island. So each time I would bring this up, asking who is the actual owner and
So what are you doing today?
if you were who's the actual owner. So I asked the question of like who owns the deed, because that's one of the things the Department of Finance told me to watch out for, fraudulent activities. And that's a lot of what I've been experiencing, meaning that the bank who says that they own a note, which is the many things that banks do with a note, is they sell it from one bank to another bank to another bank to another bank. And they sort of play ping pong with these foreclosure notes that each client has. Also, a lot of these banks also have insurance on them. So even if it's in foreclosure, the bank has already got their money. So in my case, not only did the bank get their money probably more than one time, I'm also asking them to back up if they have rights to this, because that's very important. Because at one point, I have two letters, one from one servicing company and another one from another bank saying they both have my note. But no one can prove to me who has a note. Even though I may not have heard from the second one, I still have evidence. So my another argument is I don't want to pay for something, and then another bank come back and say, "Hey, you owe us another $400,000," and I'm like, "But wait a minute, I already paid one." So that's why you have to be very careful, especially when banks switch service providers. You're supposed to know who the new service provider is, as well as the bank that is there. A lot of times that did not happen. I've had several different service providers. They're not telling me who the bank is, how the bank even got in there. And the bank themselves are supposed to introduce themselves and let you know that they're the one ultimately holding your note. In my case, there's no documentation. A lot of that shows a vast majority of that. So each time I go to court, there's always something new. And like I said, sometimes you have to even be wary of the lawyers that you obtain. And you have to do your due diligence. That's where it becomes very difficult if you know nothing about real estate. And it also can be very daunting and scary, because you think, and as a person that goes to these professionals, you think and you believe that they're going to do the right thing and give you the needed information or point you at least in the right direction so you know what to do and you know what questions to ask. Many times I did not get that kind of assistance. Okay. Most people want to dismiss it or they just think it's me, but all these things make sense. This is why we have lawyers, right? Because if the if it wasn't a certain order in which things were supposed to be done, then we wouldn't need a lawyer. But you need a lawyer so the lawyer can break everything down. And like I said, you have to be careful, and I've had to be careful even most recently. I have to be careful because the lawyers, even one lawyer that I paid actually worked for the bank, right? Meaning I'm telling my lawyer, hey, I need to understand how they got this amount. That's all I'm asking. And then let's go from there. That lawyer did not do that. And a lot of times he didn't even show up in my court case. And that's what I paid him for, right? He came back with a whole bunch of excuses or, you know, oh, there's no need to do that, and so forth and so on. Right. But and also another thing, he never talked to me directly. A lot of times he talked to me through someone else. So I have been fighting this battle for quite some time. And I've been able to um, do what I do by learning and asking questions. That is sometimes the biggest fear. So currently that's where I stand. I want to know where we are because it's like I said, it's a very daunting thing. Another thing that also happens through this process is a lot of these banks or these developers, especially what's going on in Brooklyn, they do their research on an individual. They know everything that there is to know about you, meaning that I've received calls from developers or people who wanted to purchase my properties, and they would be like, "Oh, well, we see that you lost your father, and your mother is older, and you have a child, and your child has a disability." So they do their research on you, and they play on your sympathy, especially when you are trying to address this matter, and they push you. They're very adamant about pushing people and pointing out the reason why you should sell your property or why you should give into the bank or why you should do this. And sometimes even the lawyers can be the same way. Lawyers can be very dismissive because they know you don't understand or they assume that you don't understand. Problems usually come in with an attorney when you ask questions that they cannot answer. And that sometimes is what happened with one of my past lawyers, the one prior to what I have here. A lot of times he would speak to me briefly. And even when we went to court, because at a certain point, when you're in this foreclosure process and you actually have the actual um, documentation to prove your case. My lawyer did not show up. He sent someone else. And the other person that he sent kept pushing for me to sell. He was like, oh, and they all told me the same thing, actually doing this scare tactic of, oh, you're gonna lose your property, you're gonna be homeless. You should just let's just, let's just get through this, just sign this. They're gonna give you a settlement agreement. Once you get the settlement agreement, everything will be fine. And you're young, you can make money and you can pay for it and you can do this and you can do that. And that sometimes can be a very challenging thing if you've already spent a series of money on a lawyer. You've already done everything that you possibly do to obtain this. Because if you're spending X amount of money on a lawyer, then how do you pay your other bills? Because the idea is when you have this home and you have equity in it, right? You could take a loan out to repair the home so that you can get better tenants. And this way, that's one way of maintaining and keeping your home because you get tenants that could pay a decent rent. Then guess what? You can always pay your mortgage. But if you're wrapped up in litigation all the time, and this is a tactic a lot of them use, they keep you in litigation constantly, where you have to get a new lawyer, you have to do this, you have to do that. Then what happens is then your money starts to deplete, right? Because somewhere something else suffers, not to mention the mental, the physical and emotional toll that it takes on one's body during that time. So like I said, when we were in court, my lawyer, who wasn't even there, was pushing and pushing and pushing for that settlement, never once offering me and getting me what I was asking for. And he had someone else that was helping him, the person who referred me. And to avail, I still haven't gotten the information, right? So even the judge during the actual court was yelling at at the bank or the servicing company, really the servicing company. She's like, you've had 10 years to get this together and you still don't have it together. I don't understand what the problem is. Right. And she knew, but Georges have to stay impartial. Right. And no matter what they brought up, it did not counteract all that I had on them, all the documents, all the letters, or whatever materials I had against them, they could not go against that. So right now, as it stands, we're at a standstill, right? They've offered me a settlement, and within that settlement, as I said, it is a $200,000 difference. Nowhere can they justify that extra $200,000. Most people could say, "Oh, it's interest, it's this," but also remember during this time of COVID, what the United States did, or what the banking people did during that time, was they froze or did not allow banks to add interest on a loan. So within this breakdown, I should see that. I should see that credit. But there was no credit, right? They tried to put a credit before that, but the credit still showed, came up with a $300,000 difference. And even in the statements that they send, you see a credit for a certain amount of money. And when the judge saw it, even like I said, after COVID and everything, after she saw it, she said, well, how do you give her, what is this credit? And they said, well, it's a loan. And she said, okay, well, what's the interest on a loan? Oh, it was a free loan. And she was like, you can't do that. You can't give a free loan. Who does that? You can't do that. That goes against banking regulations. So it is very, very, I can't stress enough how important it is to keep every single piece of paper. And if you have to, when it's time or you have a question, right, don't be afraid to go to the Department of Finance, the Department of Consumer Affairs, the governor's office. And if you vote your state legislators and congressmen or councilmen that are in the area, or even your borough president, because someone has an answer. I mean, sometimes it's hard because if you're working full time, how do you have time to do that if you're taking care of family? And in my case, they knew exactly who I was taking care of. Because when some of the developers were calling, they would mention that, oh, we see that your mom went to the hospital. Oh, we know your mom is old. You know, you should sell your house. You can move to Florida with her, or you can even move to the Bronx. I said, well, why don't you go to the Bronx? Why don't you call somebody up there and ask them for their house in the Bronx? Why are you coming to me? They didn't have an answer. So these are some of the things that one experiences. And as I said, I'm still going through it right now. So that's pretty much it. I don't know what else to say.
Valerie, thank you so much for sharing your story. If anyone has any questions, if you just unmute yourself, I'm sure that Valerie would be happy to answer that question for you. But one question I do want to bring up, Valerie, is if you don't mind sharing,
Hmm.
how much is your property worth now? Because I think that would really help to explain why developers are really after you. Not just that it's in Brooklyn and it's in a neighborhood that is being gentrified, but
Hmm.
just if you could share with us, like you don't have to give
Sure.
us
No, I
the
mean, it's public record, so I actually don't.
okay.
When my dad died in 1996, the house was valued at $225,000. Fast forward to today, the last estimate for my house, because I have a driveway and I guess like a terrace kind of thing. The highest I've seen it go for in my neighborhood is $2.1 million. So
That's
it's wild.
yeah. Mm.
That's a big difference.
And it totally understands, like
Yeah,
explains
yeah.
why,
That's
you
why they
know,
try to grab it.
yeah, why they're coming after you so hard and making it so hard for you. Well, I know you also mentioned, speaking to our politicians and attorney general. Have you reached out to any of them? And if you have, what advice or help have they given you thus far?
Well, some of them, see, another thing that was very tricky was at the time when I originally reached out to many of them, they couldn't do much. They couldn't do much because we were technically still in court. So that is how the bank was able to do it. They did because technically they kept me in court. for a long time, right? So when even if it gets adjourned or whatever they call it, or they postpone the date, because they would postpone the dates, right, on when we were
Mhm.
supposed to go to court. Then if I write to Attorney General, I write to somebody, first thing they say, oh, but you're in court, it's not settled yet, right? So the
Yeah.
difference is technically you gave me a settlement agreement. So now this is where it's at a standoff. And that's why they're a little upset with me. Just a little bit. So, yeah.
I know in our conversation you did mention, and this is something that you and I have spoken about, how, they came to your house, they were calling you. Not only did they mention that they knew that your mother was elderly, she didn't feel well, you have a daughter with disability, give up this house, it's so much work for you, why
Mhm,
don't you move to Florida, move here? And I think they also, from what I understand, it was like they wanted to kind of shame you because they were like,
mhm,
"Oh, you're in foreclosure. Why are you fighting so hard?
mhm,
Stop putting all this extra stress on yourself. Just walk away from the situation." And I think
mhm,
that's something that um a lot of people struggle with. Like they think there's a stigma connected to being in foreclosure. And instead of fighting, and also because it's so time consuming and it does cost a lot of money, they
mhm.
eventually just walk away.
Right. A lot of the developers don't look like you and I, right? So let's be clear on that.
Mhm.
And because of that, they bank on cultural habits and behavior patterns. And a lot of times, a lot of people of color don't like to be humiliated or ashamed, especially when it
Mhm.
comes down to finances. We are not known to speak about it or talk about it. And it's also, that's why sometimes you hear people have an issue when they say, people don't deserve reparations, right? Because
Yeah.
they see that as like some kind of handout, like it's like, oh, you're getting welfare or something. You don't need that. You need to, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But in order to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you gotta have boots on, right? If you don't have
Mhm.
boots, then how you gonna do that? So that's what a lot of times they rely on. And they check through everything. Like they literally like they check, I think it's the Department of Records that has your death certificates as well as birth certificates. So they research to see if there's a will, right? Because it's
Mhm.
nice, it is good to have a will, but people have access to those wills and they can see who are the children or who's the heir of that will, and then they start contacting them. In some cases, I know other people where someone not too far from me passed away, and like one bank I was told, like Chase Manhattan Bank and um, I think Bank of America, literally called everybody in the neighborhood to find the heirs of that house. Yeah, they called
Wow.
everybody. They were calling the next door neighbors. Oh, do you know where so and so is? Do you know where so and so is? Or everything, right? So they pay very close attention to that. They pay close attention to like finding out who's in the home, what they have, what they don't have. And they'll reach, like I've had people who moved out who haven't been living in my house for quite some time when I rented, and they would call the person, hey, somebody called me asking me if you were selling your house, like what's your number so I can get in contact with you. So they do a lot of things, like, and also when they physically come to your door, because I've had that where like developers would, they'll come, or real estate people, they'll come and they're literally either at one time I remember one man came like with a bag, like, a suitcase full of cash. I think it was about $75,000 in cash at the time. And then another one came, and it was sort of sad to say because it was two Jewish guys, and they had um, a black guy with them. But it was a black guy who had something smart to say, right?
Mm.
So he was like, "Oh, well, you're in foreclosure. I don't know why you're not talking to somebody." And at the time, I said something smart back, which was, "Then you're on my property and I can shoot you. Did you know that?" you know, Pick your poison. They, you know. So a lot of times they can be very condescending. They can be dismissive. They can be degrading. You know, I mean, they've even attacked things like, "Oh, you were married. You're not even married anymore. You can't handle this house." Like they get personal. I even had one woman, like, literally, if you would have heard her, I was like, "Wow, you're good." Like, she was like a therapist. She was like, "Oh, I know you're suffering and it's difficult to be a single woman and you gotta take care of your mother. Like, that is so difficult. Anytime you need me, call me any day or night. Call me. I'm there for you." I was like, "I don't know you," and hung up the phone. Like, had to act like one of the kids I work with. Just give straight attitude. So I mean, they do play on you. And it's been in cycles. Those things come in cycles,
Mm.
right? So meaning when people call me, because it's been about 13 years, at least about 13 years roughly. Um, it'll, for maybe about 2 years, I'll get calls. And then 4 years, no, maybe about another 2 years, no calls. And then it'll speed back up again. And it's like this, some calls for 1 year, no calls for another year. Well, maybe 2 years. They may give me 2 years with no calls,
Mhm.
going after my personal and stuff like that. But it's it's just very interesting to watch. And in the beginning, it was very hard. Like, I think for the first, I mean, five, maybe 7 years, right? Maybe even longer than that. Maybe even eight years, right? Even 8 years. I I did not sleep. I was like totally stressed. It took it takes a toll on you mentally, right? Someone calling you, someone telling you about your business or something like that, because you don't know what to do, right? Especially if you don't have people around you that own homes. And if you do have people around that own homes, they act like they ain't got no problems, right? You know, they act like they have absolutely no problem. So it's very difficult. And then, it's also who you surround yourself with, and also your belief, right? You have to have a certain amount of tenacity and strength and belief in yourself and risk, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a risk, right? Nobody wants to be homeless. I don't want to be homeless, especially when I work hard. It's different if, I'm out there doing something I shouldn't be doing, and I obtain money and I got it, that's fast money or something. But if I
Mhm.
worked hard and went to school and I do my dues and I do what I'm supposed to do. Why can't I have that? Why can't I keep it? And I'm grateful that I have, but like I said, it was for a very long time. I didn't get sleep. Like, I didn't go out. I wouldn't go out with my friends. They'd be like, "Why you don't go out?" No, I want to stay home. Because I ain't got no money. I put all my money in my house. You know what I mean?
I mean, I applaud you because I know 7 years was a struggle. And it's not only you that you had to worry about being
Right.
homeless. You have a daughter, and at that time she was a teenager. You have a mother, your mother was living with you, and she has she's elderly. She has health problems, and you're worried about her. So now you have this added stress of having to keep this home,
Hmm.
continue building the generational wealth that your father left to you, and you're getting it from all sides. So I really do applaud you for staying strong and, fighting the good fight.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, it's difficult, and even like, people think because I say, quote unquote, my daughter has a disability that, like, or she can't handle it. I don't know. That's not true. She may have some challenges, but she is not disabled. She has challenges in there, but trust me, she's very, very aware because she's studying economic finance. And we had a whole conversation about ghost mortgage. So Do not sleep on her at all. If you wish to, that's your choice. I tell you, proceed with caution because she did learn from her mother. So, and I think it's very important. Like one thing I've learned is during this time is very important. We as parents, we as adults really should talk to our children about finances, right? I remember I had a good friend I worked with. Her name was Pam, and she was an accountant. And I used to always admire her because she was like so good at it, right? And I asked her, like, wow, how you so good at finances and stuff? And she said, you know what my father did to me when I was younger? I used to ask him, I wanted new shoes, I wanted a new book bag, I wanted this. So one day what he did was he gave me the checkbook and he gave me his paycheck. And my mom gave me the paycheck. And I was responsible for paying all the bills. So she had to pay all the bills, right? So what she did first was she bought all the things that she wanted for herself, right? Yeah, things for her brother, everything, right? So he said, okay, what are we gonna do about food? So then she had to go back and then she had to take something away, right? And he said, okay, what about lights? Because this is the light bill, right? So each time, so then she began to see, she began to understand, right, the importance of managing your money. And she said, from that day forward, she never looked at money the same again. She understands what she got to do, how she got to do it, and she stays true to that. And I think a lot of times parents, we don't want to share that with our kids because we don't want our kids to believe that we're weak. But it's not about us being weak. It's really about teaching them how to cope, how to handle their own emotions and their mental that is attached to that. Because that's very like is is priceless. And I see that even like with the work that I do, that the thing is we don't teach our kids how to cope. So that's why we have kids and everybody's trying to understand why are you so upset? Like it's just a t-shirt. Like you're going crazy over a t-shirt. They don't understand because they don't know how to cope with their emotions, their inability to not get something that they want. So I think that's very important. So,
Valerie, when we started, we went right into it, and you weren't able to introduce yourself and tell people what you do for a living. So please take a moment to do that.
okay. Well, currently, after a long struggle and career changes, currently I'm a marriage and family therapist. And my biggest reason for that is mainly because I believe in family and love and relationships. And I think that in our community, it is not an emphasis because, like, as a quote unquote MFT, which is someone that actually has a master's in marriage and family therapist, there are very few of them. And to this day, I have not met one marriage and family therapist that is Black. I have not met one in New York. So I'm like a unicorn. Most of the time,
Mhm.
most people meet therapist, like they meet a therapist, they're usually a social worker who's a clinical licensed social worker, which they're very similar, but one is just trained, that's their main focus is the family unit and helping a person manage with their emotions and their relationships because we're affected by the relationships around us, not necessarily by an individual, like in being individualistic, right? So a lot of what I do, I deal with families, helping them to cope, teaching them the skills. And if the family has someone with a disability, or even if the person themselves has a disability, so I do that, and my concentration is in that, as well as trauma and sex therapy. Well, that goes, which it should really go without saying with family therapy because you got to have somebody, right? That's usually how it goes. But and yeah, those are the main trauma. Oh, developmental disabilities, or dealing with someone with disabilities because that's very hard on relationships and marriage. Um, if your child is born with a disability, not many people know how to handle that. I mean, even I can even honestly say within my own marriage that happened. right? It's not like, my daughter had a physical disability, and that's the thing, when it's a disability you can't see, it's harder for people to comprehend and deal with. So that's pretty much my life works, I guess.
You for sharing that. I will open it up, and if anyone has any questions, please unmute yourself and you can speak to Valerie directly. Well, Valerie, no one seems to have a question for you, so I want to thank you for your time. And I'm
Mhm.
going to give everybody else 20 minutes back. Thank you for joining us. And the recording will be uploaded to the website. If you joined us a little late, you'll be able to find it. Again, Valerie, thank you for sharing your story with us. This will be a series, so we will speak to other people who are going through similar situations. Please stay tuned for
Oh,
that information.
you know
Sorry.
what? I did want to add one other thing that's
Yes.
very, very important. I
Hmm.
just thought of it. Whenever you own a home, always check the city registry, because on the city registry, it tells you who is supposed to have a lien against your home. So, for example, if you took out a loan with Citibank, it should have Citibank's name and then your name. That's how the deed should look, but it should show Citibank, the bank, not the service provider. Service providers are not allowed to be on that city registry. You're supposed to know who ultimately owns your note. If you do not, which in my case, you can clearly see they did a lot of shady stuff on mine. There's 100 services on there, taking off, then they put this. That's when you know they're going to do some trickery. So I I beg of many of you to take the time to check that city registry. If you can't find it on the web, because sometimes it's very difficult to access it, if you can find some time to go down there to make sure no one has added themselves to your deed, because if or registered themselves, because if they have, then they can maybe take you to like landlord tenant court and say they have access to your deed and get you evicted or whatever trickery people are doing nowadays. So I just want to make sure I added that. Sorry.
Thank you. That was good. I think we all needed to hear that information. But again, thanks everyone for joining. Again, this is a series, so there will be more webinars speaking on this subject. And I just want to give everyone back, what, 18 minutes now? Oh, does someone have a question?
Um, it's not a question. What happened to me, I want to let you all know, was a couple of my property was listed on the FMLS, and actually an investor called me and actually they are selling it. Why property? And that's how I happened to know it was listed. But I found out is certainly a realtor listed, and I confronted that broker, and they finally sent me uh, the signed contract, but did forge my name and put the land on the FMLS for sale. So be careful about that. Um, Looking for, I look at your county and it's for nothing going on with your record.
Well, how are you able to fix that situation so that you don't
I
have to worry about them selling your house?
Well, it's still I am working with because I am a realtor myself too.
Mhm.
So I'm just
Oh,
asking my broker what to do. She hasn't said that to me. I was thinking now I do have the forged document, the contract. So I was because I do see that realtor certainly did a mistake of not verifying that whoever request to put the house on sale, right?
uh-huh.
Because they just did a electronic DocuSign document
Oh.
with my name on it and
Hmm.
the electronic signature on it, and
Hmm.
they did not have any verification done. So it is clearly a part of the Delta, but He's an older gentleman, so I don't want to really go after him. But it is something happening, but we have to start. So that's what I try to work out with the GREC, which is the Georgia State Commission. So trying to see what we can do to stop this.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah. That's another thing that's really important that a lot of times that we don't know what to look for, right? Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Especially when you are on the real estate world, you
right,
really don't know. You
right.
just buy a house and live in it happily and pay the mortgage and the things like that. You don't know the rest of the what is going on.
Exactly. So it's almost like which is, maybe something we could work on. Like you need to know what the basic or minimum items should be in certain contracts that you should look for or
Mhm.
be be aware of, because a lot of times, like even with me, one time when they were serving me, like, because they send this big thing of letting you know that they're taking you in foreclosure, they send you a copy of all your contracts and they use legal paper. But I remember when I did credit and collections and we would shrink legal paper, the signature they had or the initials they had was below where the legal paper was when they shrunk it. And you have to look at your signature because a lot of times they can copy and paste things. So a lot of things can be done with paperwork. So you have to be very wary and you have to look in, just like they can take stuff out, they can put stuff in.
Yep.
So when you have your original, you want to make sure you got the original, look for the basics, check where whose name is there and whose name is not there, or commas, right? Something as simple as a comma can determine who who has possession and how much possession they have of something, right? So if you got three people and there's only one comma behind one person's name, that means 50% is going to go to one person and 50% is going to go to two people. So commas make a very big impact. There's a book, I think it's called Black Law's Book. I just got it, and it helps break down certain legal terminology that can help you when looking at contract. Like now, when I look at a contract, I'm gonna take like a 2 days or a week to go through it meticulously. So yeah, that's important.
Because uh, I think we do to have as a realtor myself, you have to verify with different form of identification before sign a contract.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's really hard to figure out. You can certainly forge really easy electronic documents.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. The electronic ones are more helpful, but even then, you you still need time to look it over, right? Because
Yeah, because it's an easy check for us as a realtor.
mhm,
If somebody said, okay, send it. It is a simple check. Go to the county record and look at it, who is the owner,
right,
and verify that thing.
exactly,
It's not that big of a deal.
right.
Even the investors is calling me. They were looking around and figured out I am the owners, and they're calling me instead of calling that realtor, whoever that realtor is.
Mhm.
Listen to my house. Anyway,
Again, Sandy, thank you so much for
yeah.
sharing. If no one else has anything else to add, I just want to thank everyone for donating their time, especially Val. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I hope to see you at our
Said fraud only occurs in urban areas. Yeah, I mean, it does. It's concentrated in urban slash economically challenged areas because of, like I said earlier, the cultural piece. A lot of people know, um, limited resources, right? Because remember, even if we have like a free legal aid, everybody can be bought out because they're not getting paid a lot, right? Unlike if you get a high powered lawyer, that person is getting paid. So those are some of the things. And people don't share the information, right? We don't always share the information that we are struggling, that we are having a problem, or that we're encountering an issue. And that is something that we need to, work on. So that's why it's great we have this forum to talk about those kind of things and to express that and find out what someone is going through. So thank you for
Thank
that.
you. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to let everyone go now. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And again, there will be more webinars about this subject, and that will be on the website, www.realestateandcolor.com. Please give me at least 48 hours to update it with this recording. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.